Hi, I'm Kevin Killen, and we're here at Peter Gabriel's famous Real World Studios, recording an extensive library for Toontrack. So in this video, I'm going to go through my microphone setup, so we're going to start with the kick drum. On the interior, inside mic is a RE20. Then outside we have a Neumann FET U47 with a 10 dB pad. And then also we have this Yamaha sub kick, which sometimes I use and sometimes I do not, but I've set up in this case just to get a little extra low end resonance. So that's what we have going on the front of the kick drum. You know, over the years, I've cycled through different microphones for the kick drum. You know, I've gone from D12 when I first started recording back in 1979. And then at some point I got introduced to the RE20 and I just liked its punch. I generally felt like it had a good mid-range punch to it, which I really like on a kick drum. And I've always seemed to come back to the RE20. Every now and again I'll go with a Beyer M88, but the RE20 seems to be my favorite. The FET 47 is just something, you know, I will put up to see if it adds any kind of roundness to the sound. Sometimes depending on the size and the shape of the kick drum, you get a lot of attack, and sometimes with the 47 you get this little low end pillow that's just nice to add in. So it's kind of like a little alternate EQ that you can add into the blend. And then with the sub kick, it's nice to have that kind of super low end. Sometimes I'll just capture it and then maybe in the mix I'll decide if I want to use it, but you can't mix it in if you don't capture it. So better to have it there rather than try and add it later. Once you're getting a drum sound at the top of a session, you're not necessarily knowing what all the information is going to be in the track. So you get the broadest sound possible and then you may sculpt it slightly later. But generally I'm more of a minimalist in terms of just capturing it, try and get the sound I want to hear at the source and go from there. As you can see, it has a very unique bumblebee color, which we've affectionately named it. Anyway, then move around to the general view of the kit. We have snare drum with 57s top and bottom. Also on the snare over here, the side snare, it is 57s top and bottom. If you notice on the octobans, I'm actually miking them from underneath, so I'm using Sennheiser 421s. Hi-hat, I'm using an AKG 451 with a CK2 capsule. I will sometimes alternate between that or a KM84, depending on how the hi-hats sound. Then we have 5 toms here, concert toms, starting from the lowest to the highest. I generally will mic and present drums from drummer's perspective. That's usually my preferred methodology. So I've got Sennheiser 421s on all the toms. And then overheads, I'm using a set of Coles 4038s. And you'll notice that I have them at slightly different heights, because sometimes I've found over the years that if you want to get the snare drum to be equal, generally this perspective, which would be drummer right, needs to come down a little bit just to kind of get the more even range of the drums. I think when I first started out as a recordist back in '79, I was using Neumann U87s, which are fantastic sounding microphones. And I've tried them, I've tried AKG 414s, also great sounding. I found that when I switched over to Coles, there was something about the bidirectionality of the Coles that made it feel like when you push up those two mics, it sounds closer to what the drums sound like in the room. Whereas, you know, all the other microphone sets, while they're fantastic sounding, it felt a little bit more discreet and separated to my ear. So I felt like this gave me the best view of what it felt like when I would stand in front of the drums and I'd be listening to the way the drums would sound in the room, and I'd walk back into the control room and I would invariably push up the overhead mics to see what they sounded like, because to me that would best represent what you were hearing in the room. This will give us the directionality and maybe the impact, but this will give us closer to the room tones. Today in the wood room, it's called the wood room, but in fact, there's actually a lot of stone in this room, so it actually has quite a bright sound to it, obviously wood floors. So to my right and to my left, you'll see a pair of Neumann U87s, which generally is a wonderful sounding microphone. And in this particular room, it's a very neutral sound, so it accurately reflects what's actually occurring in the room. We get a lot of kind of initial impact and a lot of brightness out of the room, so these capture that. And then behind me, I've set up a mid-side pair, which is a Telefunken 251. And then the side address is using a Royer or 122, which is the active ribbon. And I might not normally set that up as a typical microphone room setup, but in this instance, I thought it would be a good option for the user to have an additional width control to kind of give a sense of space and dimension that's different from the overheads and different from what we're going to capture from these two room mics. So, and I used a similar kind of setup in the big room for my room microphones. I had a pair of U87s, and I also set up an additional mono U67 right in front of the drum set that I used a tiny bit of compression on to give a little extra sense of space. And then I also used a quite distant MS pair. Similar to this, instead of using the 251, I used two ribbons, or 122. So it's not quite a MS configuration, but it is a width configuration. So I'm actually up on the mezzanine here, which is one floor above where the drums are. And this is actually a really cool space. I've often placed microphones up here, and in this particular instance, we have 4 microphones set up in a quad array, which hopefully you can use if you're doing any kind of immersive mixing or immersive projects. And what we have are these Sheps CMC 5s. And you know, what I like about this is it captures the brightness of this room because there's a lot of snap in the room. If I clap my hands, you'll hear it. And what these microphones do is they really, really capture that tonality really well. So I've used that many times in the past when I'm recording other instruments in this room, just have them in there and feed a little bit in. So it creates a bit of natural ambience and a natural bit of decay and dimension, and it's a really good asset. The one other additional room mic that I want to mention is in the corner here, we have this Neumann U67, which I'm also using as a mono room ambience tone. And we actually had this door open, which goes out to a stairwell, and I had that microphone placed out in the stairwell. For this particular drum, I've moved that microphone inside the door, just for a different tonality and a different perspective. So we've been here at Reel for the last 2 weeks, recording numerous drum kits. So far in this room, we've recorded 4 or 5, and I hope you get to enjoy all the various offerings we have recorded here at Reel for Toontrack.